Let's talk about folk and fairy tales. Martin Hallett and Barbara Karasek, I think, provide an excellent introduction in their volume of folk and fairy tales that we'll be reading from this semester. Folk and fairy tales are part of our oral tradition. As they ask the question, they deal with it, and you should think about these questions toward responses later in the semester or later this week. What happens to stories as they are transmitted orally? How are they changed? Think about the broken telephone game that they mentioned, where you start with saying something on one side of the room and it changes as it goes to the other side of the room. When we hear things, we hear them according to our own past experiences and opinions and fears and everything. So then what happens to these when they're written down? Hallett and Karasek don't ask the question, but I would like to ask further, what happens to them when they're turned into a movie? How are they crystallized in our mind? So be thinking about these questions. Why do these stories endure? And why have they sometimes been considered inappropriate for young children? We should think about the nature of story in general. Why do we need stories? Why do we need fairy tales? What reasons do Hallett and Karasek offer? In some classes, I teach about monsters, and we ask questions, why do we create monsters? So I'm asking that same question here. Are we projecting fears? Are we projecting things about humanity that we don't want to admit belong to us onto folk and fairy tales? What is all of that about? As you read the several versions of Red Riding Hood that are included in the volume, note the ways in which the story changes from one generation to another. And again, why do Hallett and Karasek think this happens? Be sure and ask yourself those questions and look for the answers that they provide. As Hallett and Karasek point out, Disney turned many of our fairy tales into a commodity. Perhaps this semester we can reclaim a few of them. If you do a simple Google search for Cinderella, the top of the hit list, the top hit on the list, will be the 2015 movie with Lily James as Cinderella. Notice that the Disney folks have not forgotten what she looked like in 1950 when the first Disney Cinderella film appeared. She's still blonde. She's still got on a blue dress with somewhat capped sleeves. I think that's what you call it. The dress is still flowing behind her. She's still holding onto it with her hands. Very, very iconic image that they have preserved here. By the way, Disney follows the Perrault version of the story of Cinderella, and you'll be reading that later. According to Wikipedia, and I did make one correction in this list, I haven't checked every one of them, but I just think that it's a revealing look. Disney turned fairy tales and folk tales into a number of full-length movies beginning in 1937 with Snow White. And you can see the list. You can stop the slide progression and read it for yourself, including Pinocchio, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which, by the way, qualifies as a fairy tale. Lewis Carroll, in fact, called Alice Through the Looking Glass a fairy tale himself. Certainly Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Hua Mulan, which is a traditional Chinese story, The Frog Princess, Rapunzel, The Snow Queen, and interesting, I think, forthcoming There is a version of Jack and the Beanstalk that plays off of Frozen that will be called Gigantic. And the giant this time is an 11-year-old little girl, and the movie will be filmed in Spain. So, do you think that Disney will not capitalize on success? Of course he will. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Besides the full-length movie versions of fairy and folk tales that Disney created, he has also, the studios created a long list of animated shorts, what we call cartoons. Um, Beginning in 1922 with Little Red Riding Hood, Bremertown Musicians. You notice there's quite a few of them in 1922. And then he progresses on to The Ugly Duckling, to Babes in the Wood, Hansel and Gretel, and the list goes on. All of this speaks to the importance of the fairy tale and folktale genres and their commodification. And Disney is not the only one smart enough to keep digging in this productive mine. That's for sure. If Star Wars isn't a fairy tale, then what is it? Is the opening of Star Wars really very different than Once Upon a Time in a Strange Land, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away? Not too different. Besides, who's to say George Lucas didn't hear some neat old stories in Chalmun's cantina while visiting Tatooine? I, I thought it would be interesting for us to examine Little Red Riding Hood along with a poem by E. Cummings. Hallett and Karasek talk about Little Red Riding Hood in some detail in the introduction, and how particularly Perrault changed the use of it to be a warning to young ladies about wolves that didn't look like wolves, who were actually more dangerous. Certainly, young ladies experience some dangerous time in their lives in adolescence and going into puberty. As Hallett and Karasek point out, it's easy for us to see the French version of Little Red Riding Hood by Perrault as a coming-of-age story aimed at proper young ladies. After all, sometimes a wolf is just a wolf, but I'm with Perrault. Not this time, I think. Sometimes a wolf is just a wolf, but not every time. And about wolves, just for fun, here's a link to a really funny video about a wolf. This is John Brannian telling the story of the Three Little Pigs in Shakespeare's English. Pretty hysterical. I'll post a separate link on Canvas so you won't have to do it from here. Perrault is warning young women about the most dangerous kind of wolf, the one walking around on two legs, of course. Perrault recognizes the vulnerability of young adolescent women. But what about young men? Aren't we all more vulnerable as adolescents? All of us, male, female, aren't we all? Hallett and Karasek recognize Perrault's version as a coming-of-age story. Let's look at a modern poem about coming of age. This is E. Cummings' poem, In Just Spring. It created quite a stir when it first appeared. Cummings' message was not veiled as a fairy tale. And even in the ambiguous form of modern poetry, it's hard to miss the subject. Here's a YouTube video with Cummings reading his poem, and I'll let you click on that and listen to it. Be sure to listen to the sound of the poem as he reads it. Does it move smoothly or does it limp along? Why might that be the case? Also, just look at the poem. Does it look smooth or does it look like it limps along? The goat-footed balloon man is lame, right? So let's read the poem. In just spring, when the world is mud luscious, the little lame balloon man whistles far and wee, and Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring when the world is puddle wonderful. The queer old balloon man whistles far and wee, and Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring, and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee. There could be several reasons why the poem looks the way it does. Most obviously, the balloon man is lame, so it makes sense for the poem to visually limp along. Could the limping meter and visual appearance suggest the normal awkwardness of adolescent sexual awakening? Can we identify this as a universal theme? Isn't it something that all humans experience? In studying literature, poetry, novels, everything, we refer to universality as something that can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Don't all humans in every culture, in every age, go through this pubescent experience, awkwardness, not knowing what to do with all these hormones? It's a normal, natural, universal occurrence. And this continues this same discussion. Sometimes students find the balloon man to be a little frightening, threatening perhaps. I, for one, am willing to admit experiencing such feelings during adolescence, that awkward time of my own life. Most identify the balloon man as Pan, the god of sexuality. And I agree. He is playing pipes, whistling far and wee. Satyrs are hybrid creatures, but they don't play pipes. Both are usually identified with spring, fertility, and sexuality, but I have to think Pan is our guy this time. Some have suggested that the balloon man might be a pedophile, luring children to danger. I don't think a pedophile is what Cummings had in mind, but the allure of sexuality at a young age can certainly be dangerous. Moreover, we must consider that this poem was published on the heels of the Victorian age, when such things were not discussed, much less written about. Post-Victorian people didn't want to admit to anything about sexuality. They certainly didn't want it written down. Isn't that almost certainly why Perrault crafted his version of Little Red Riding Hood the way he did, as a subtle warning? Sometimes a balloon man is just a balloon man. But not every time. Sometimes a fairy tale is more. Thanks. Enjoy reading the fairy tales, and we'll be discussing and talking about them later. Hope you enjoy. Thanks.